We are delighted to have Wendy here. Her first book of poems, which she has copies of, Blood Sisters of the Republic, appeared from Press 53 in 2012. She's published her work in various publications such as The Rumpus, Poetry Northwest, the Collectivist Literary Review, the Bellingham Review, and elsewhere. Her essay on place, Where Are You From?, originally appeared in Oregon Humanities and was reprinted in Utne. She's also an associate fellow in poetry at the Attic Institute. In addition to her poetry career, Wendy is the executive director of the Policy Consensus Initiative and the director of civic engagement at the National Policy Consensus Center at Portland State. Prior to joining that, she was the executive director of the City Club. Thank you for that, being a City Club member. She has also served as Assistant Public Defender for the District of Oregon and a law clerk to Chief Justice Wallace P. Carson, Jr. of the Oregon Supreme Court. She graduated magna cum laude from Georgetown Law Center and holds an MFA from Pacific Lutheran and a BA from Willamette University. We are very delighted to have Wendy here as our poet tonight, so would you join me in welcoming Wendy Willis?
Thanks so much, Tom, and thank you to everyone. It's such a miracle to me that that a municipality is devoted to poetry as the city of Milwaukee is. I know that one of our friends, Greg, might have something to do with that, who's on the city council here, but I also think that it really is a testament to this poetry series. I've sat in the audience so many times, so I'm so excited to get to read here. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to read. I'm going to start with what I think of as the. I'm a Catholic after all, so I'm going to start with an invocation. This is a poem called "Quicked." Quicked. Yes, then let it in. The wind fired with sand, let it in, the tortoise rutting at midnight in, and the cockroach in the half-drunk wineglass, let it in, the scorpion, the packer in, let them in, the jungle, the creeping nightshade, in, and the Mayans, fierce but never tall enough, let them in too. The bitter coffee with cream, in and in, a pigginful, a porridge pot, a pipkin, a spittoon then, let's go with that. In, too rough for an amphora, not a beaker or a flask, oh, drawer or gunny sack, pitcher or velvet pouch, a trough, a trinket box, a barrel, a bread box, in. Yes, mail pouch and mixing bowl, teacup, thimble, cog, the flask screws too tight, a file is too flat, but powder box, pill box, reliquary spoon in. The wash basin, the general piled his mail in, a cask, a bird bath, a kit bag, a flower pot, a trough. Hamper and laundry basket, chifforobe, bedpan, scuttle for coal. Hark box and salt box, trunk, credenza, hutch. A monstrance, a votive, a censer, a wineskin filled with smoke. For I am his love, and I let him in. Thank you, Violet. I also think at this time of year, it's hard to either go to or be at a poetry reading without invoking the spirit of Seamus Heaney. I have to say, as a young person, like Seamus Heaney helped keep body and soul together, and so given where we are in the history of the Republic right now, I want to read the poem that many of you probably know, From the Republic of Conscience, which I think is a very special poem. From the Republic of Conscience. 1. When I landed in the Republic of Conscience, it was so noiseless when the engine stopped, I could hear a curlew high above the runway. At immigration, the clerk was an old man who produced a wallet from his homespun coat and showed me a photograph of my grandfather. The woman in customs asked me to declare the words of our traditional cures and charms to heal dumbness and avert the evil eye. No porters, no interpreter, no taxi. You carried your own burden, and very soon your symptoms of creeping privilege disappeared. Fog is a dreaded omen there, but lightning spells universal good, and parents hang waddled infants in trees during thunderstorms. Salt is their precious mineral, and seashells are held to the ear during births and funerals. The base of all inks and pigments is seawater. Their sacred symbol is a stylized boat. The sail is an ear, the mast a sloping pen, the hull a mouth shape, the keel of an open eye. At their inauguration, public leaders must swear to uphold unwritten law and weep to atone for their presumption to hold office, and to affirm their faith that all life sprang from salt and tears, which the sky god wept after he dreamed his solitude was endless. I came back from that frugal republic with my 2 arms, the one length. The customs woman, having insisted my allowance, was myself. The old man rose and gazed into my face and said that was official recognition, that I was now a dual citizen. He therefore desired me when I got home to consider myself a representative and to speak on their behalf in my own tongue. Their embassies, he said, were everywhere, but operated independently, and no ambassador would ever be relieved. Wouldn't you like it if our public leaders, wept? They've got some things to weep about at the moment, I'm afraid. One of the things that's great about this room is I think I've heard like 90% of the people in this room read before. So it makes me feel so not nervous. It's a great thing. I'll read a few poems from the book Blood Sisters of the Republic, and then I'll also want to, since it's a friendly room, share some new poems as well from another manuscript that's just about done. So this is nearly the first book in the poem. It's called The Half-Life of Strawberries, and there's 2 strawberry poems in this collection. I think I'll read both of them. This one, for those of you who were at one time or are now Oregonians, might recognize some of the activities here. I wish for my girls that they could pick strawberries like I did. The Half-Life of Strawberries. Even old Mr. Cup, should I say Farmer Cup, has plowed them under now. The conical ones, hoods and northwests, half shriveled and pointed like nipples, late honey sweet and too tender to travel. They couldn't handle the truck trips. Now, thanks to the seedy-eyed botanists at universities in California, the new farmers, the made-for-TV ones, with their dark-rimmed glasses and spit-creased overalls, grow totems, bentons, shucksons too. They're heartier, oblate, at the ready for shiny Safeway tarts, stacked with cardboard kiwi and rock-hard peaches. There's nobody on the old road to pick now anyway. Well, except for the spat-out mamas and daddies and their babies with fake papers, fake dates of birth, 16 by all typed accounts, but breastless and hairless and spilling over with fear, with lies. But before all that, back before the law and the plow, we'd hang around, tight as baling wire, half dancing and half needing to pee, waiting for the berry bus, midsummer dusty and grinding gears, soaked in desire. But I can't say now desire for who knows what, but bleeding with it as a nimbus, as a halo. By 3 o'clock, we, you must ask, we who? I mean, we teenagers, we hucksters, we who would become half-baked bakers and overbaked lawyers and 2 young mothers and more than that, loggers. But loggers who wouldn't last. That we, those we, that's who I mean when I say we. Overbrimmed, rancid with want, half-calved and bawling for home, but still remembering the morning dew on those low-down plants, the ones St. Hildegard could not abide for their proximity to snakes and other loamy things. But that proximity, prolixity was the reason we'd shake off our teenage throbbing, our early morning thrum, and return the next day to our knees. And those loamy things are the reason now, even now, I weep here in Mr. Cup's old field, rimmed in over-orange pumpkins and haunted by dust. Here's the other strawberry poem. This one's completely different. This one is a poem about Anne Boleyn, but also strawberries figure in it. So it's actually called The Second Half-Life of Strawberries. Listen, there's no consolation for a misconception or a miscarriage or even a fussy stomach on a long night. But strawberries in their scarlet perfection make a credible cure for gout. My bowl runneth over. I hear that the oblate king's second wife or half-wife or second half-of-life wife, she didn't have a chance. What with her tiny neck and her third nipple, the one, they say, that was for suckling the devil. A strawberry mark, a port wine stain, a goiter, a mole, a small velvety furred burrowing mammal having small eyes and fossorial feet. She may have had 11 fingers too, Queen Anne, though it's hard to say for certain, what with all those bell sleeves and velvety lies. She always had a bun in the oven, but the boys didn't stick. Even with the supplication, the fussed over ovaries, and tin pan ovations, still the same overtures swirling around her tiny neck, with a strawberry to mark the spot. But even so, she was said to have been charming with her perfect French. I hear that the French word for desire is envie, and I know what they mean. It's a make-do world, and I'll take my envy soaked in cream. A mole, a fleshy, abnormal mass formed in the uterus by the degeneration of an ovum. You know, the strawberry is never even mentioned in the Bible, although I know it does a world of whitening for the teeth and skin. The eunuchs carved them in cathedrals, and French ladies macerated them in the bath. The Virgin Mary picks strawberries each St. John's Day, and April has a strawberry moon, though they come on in June. And listen, that skinny-necked queen, she should have known. Never split a double berry for fear of love and the king. A mole, a spy who works from within the ranks of an enemy. In the end, I guess the king, reeking of the clap, took pity on his wife, calling up France's best headsman, having sword sharpened special. It was a pity for sure, depriving the guillotine and its slab-handed peasant of that spindly neck, of that strawberry stork mark, of that saucer-white throat. For now, I've lost my appetite. Let the berries rot. Let them rot like half-forgotten roses, turn to vinegar in their bluing bowl, bloody and soft and still sweet. So the girls, Ruby and Violet, my daughters who are here tonight, we have a family member who is in labor right now over at Emmanuel Hospital. So we've been checking in with this all day. No baby yet. And so this brings to mind, of course, the birth of my own girls. And this is a poem for Ruby called Sweet Blood. So if we get an emergency call, we will ignore it, Tom, until until the end. Sweet Blood for Ruby. Because you say desire smells like corn and lure the yearling shadows close enough to nuzzle, we call you dear whisperer. Because you hiccup as the incense ball nears, we pour salt in the furthest corner of the yard. Because you whisper the hummingbird's secrets, we learn to split the baby and glue splinters back to bark. For those graces, you'll pay in cinnamon and cabbages. And though I don't recall whose arms I abandoned as you muled at the old maid's wedding, it was not a single-grain silence shattered, but an invocation of mermaid hair and green glass baubles. Because I hold you in my hand, a watermelon seed, an amulet against late summer's backward glances, you cannot be passed one apron to the next. Your just-finished skin, thin as grape skin, drapes your sweet blood as your father and I glance one last time. I cry your name in a gasp. So, let's see here. Did I get this mixed up? So I'm going to read a poem called Herbert Hoover's Ghost is the 14th Guest. And Herbert Hoover, as you probably know, is Oregon's closest brush with the presidency. Hoover is not from Oregon, but he had spent a few years here after he was orphaned. He's from Iowa, but he spent a few years in Newburgh before he went to Stanford University to become an engineer. And he was an engineer and well known to be an engineer, but was also incredibly superstitious. And so had all these kind of insane superstitions, including the fact that he wouldn't allow a White House dinner of 13 guests because it's unlucky. And so they would have a stand-in prepared to come sit at the table if 13 people happened to appear around the table. And apparently this is not an uncommon superstition. Roosevelt then continued the practice to not have 13 guests at the White House. I don't know what's become of that from now, but you'll hear a little bit about that superstition here, and a little bit. Have any of you been to the Hoover House in Newburgh? It's pretty great, isn't it? Yeah, it's great. And there's a pear tree there that was there when Hoover arrived. And also, there's a really active quilting community in Newburgh, so oftentimes you get to see these incredible displays of quilts there. So it's worth that trip too. Herbert Hoover's Ghost is the 14th Guest. Bear with me a while I ask what it is about the pear that can tempt the saint to steal and an unnerved orphan to overindulge. I'm certain it's too simple to cite the curves, even for an orphan. Or the Chinese certainty the pear promises long life and good government. No, let me tell it to you straight. This one-horse state can't afford to be choosy about its forebearers. My daughters have taken to asking, how will your ghost smell? How? How, they ask, how will we know when you've slipped into the room or lit on the seam of the bed? You know, those girls' daddy still sing the original apologia for Herbert Hoover, what with his rock-solid bearing and deep drawers full of mining wares. And Augustine, stealing those pock-marked pears, insisted it was the company he was keeping. Some confessions. The littlest girl asked, can I wear your pink lace bra when you're dead? No, true, no matter my granny's silver plate or the dog. Herbert Hoover showed up in this state a chess-playing orphan and a ward of Quakers, spent his first hour in the pear orchard and his next in the, how to put it delicately, smallest room in the house. My own granny's ghost smells of gentian violet and adding tape, of liver spot cream and telephone wire. A chicken in every pot was a little far-fetched, but at least Meatless Monday stuck it to the Catholics. And listen, I'll stand with that hard-nosed Hoover on one thing. A party for 13 will never do. Best to have a stand-in at the ready. Quoting himself, food will win the war. I'll be melted butter and bitter coffee or campfire smoke and late lilacs, wet dog and wet ink, first ramps and dandelion greens. I'd wish for a whiff of goat's milk and honey if those darling girls wouldn't recognize me better from drugstore yarn and cheap champagne. But for sure, something sweeter than a pocket copy of the Bill of Rights. We're all asked to Hooverize now and then, to leave our blind spots and a little blood spatter behind. It's good luck to cut your hair on Good Friday, and Lou Hoover from Waterloo, loving the locals in her cotton gown, invited the brown people right in the front door. The Hoover House and the pear tree, too, are now in the hands of the colonial dames. Old Hoover's ghost is left to reign over hobo camps and empty mines, over late autumn ash cans, over bankers and bread lines, over banquets 413. And all those little girls, sleeping, still wait for the creak of the crooked floor. They wait for hard-soled boots brushed against the door and a still warm haunch perched on the side of the bed. They still wait for the milk-hot breath, for the half-lit kiss. I think I'll read one more from this book. This is a poem from Violet. It's called Field Notes from the Republic. There was a time when I was traveling a lot for work. So there was a 6-month period where I was in 31 states in 6 months, and I was a hot mess by the time I got home. So this poem was started partway through that period of time. Field Notes from the Republic for Violet. You girl, you're full of questions these days. I'd tap out a map, but my hands shake, and I still can't read the stars. I hear William Clark was dead on with dead reckoning, only 40 miles off after 8,000 miles. And me, I've been to 26 states this year to get a bead on the Republic, and all I can say is this country's too big. I'd go in alphabetical order, but I'd have to skip Arizona, too planetary. The Florida pelicans you love are corseted in oil, and a boy not yet 8 vanished from a high-hilled school near home. The glaciers are melting in Montana, and spring came a full 3 weeks early to Delaware, though you'd never have known it around here. We had a blackberry winter, and all the barges are hauling logs upriver. I heard that Andromeda is 45 light years from Earth. We'd have to find each other with red tacks and twine. In Washington, the furrier's been chased out of town with spittle on his lips, and the Virginians are still hiding behind their unhired help. Violet, I miss your lightning-fast figuring of the trade-ins or trade-offs or trade-ups. For me, compensation comes in the form of a cocktail or a well-timed firecracker. I'm not even sure which of Alabama's gunmetal frills to pass along, but let me tell you this. Always call on the bees to mourn a mother's death. Sweet countryman, or is that country girl? There's a sandhill crane on the golf course in Utah, and a nosegay of Ohio hummingbirds humming down the list. 4-stair and 4-door and pay-per-view. Of course, there are wrinkle-free slacks in self-cleaning ovens in Kentucky. I am one to fret the future, but can't think past the national highway system and garage door openers and one-pot suppers. I do know this. Invention is the mother of necessity. In West Virginia, they say the death tick sounds like an old-fashioned clock, but I'm not so sure. The cherry tree you climb in the yard is blousy but barren. Reminds me of old Clark leaning back in his cherry velvet chair, celebrating Missouri and lording the Indians. Sure, the late light's fine and frail, but the oil's still slicking and the boy's still missing. It takes time and practice to perfect a pie crust. Listen, sweet tea, the other day, I saw a hobo trim his woman's hair next to the old maple tree at home. Brushed it book straight with a dime store comb, then shook the red gold cloud into the tufted morning light. And tomorrow, love, you'll ask me again and then again, like a flurry of bruise-colored moths set loose in the house. Is oil still spilling into the ocean? Is that little boy still missing his mama? Yes, the answer, my girl, is yes. So I am going to read some new poems, and one of them actually is the lovely Broadside. This is a poem. The provisional name of the new collection is Here in Jefferson's Garden of the World, and Thomas Jefferson is a major character. Especially Jefferson, especially kind of arguing with Jefferson's vision of the West. You know, Jefferson had never been west of the Blue Ridge, but had an incredibly, elaborate imagination about what the West meant. And not only was he writing letters constantly to Lewis to convince him to do the expedition, but he also was writing letters to John Jacob Astor once he got here about what he should be doing. And so this poem. That's the Broadside. More notes on the theory of American degeneracy. It was printed in the Oregonian, so I appreciate that from them. A couple of things about it. One is maybe some of you've heard about Jefferson's incredible caper with the moose. There was this theory in France going around when he was sort of ambassador-ish to France that animals and people were being sort of degenerating from noxious vapors in the United States. And Keats himself was a proponent of this theory. And so Jefferson took it on himself to prove it wrong, and how he figured he was just going to prove France wrong was by getting a gigantic whole moose and sending an attack to the salons of France. So there was a long chase that involved basically every founder to get a moose. And I think the moose that ended up in France, there was a moose, but I think the head and the body didn't actually go together, but there was a whole moose. So this is there's a line at the end in the Latin I'll probably butcher, but it's a Nunc dimittis Domine, which is from Luke. It's basically, my work is done, let me go in peace. And Jefferson often signed letters in this way. He was always announcing that his work was done, and then he went on to do the next thing. So more notes on the theory of American degeneracy. It's going to take a lot more than a moose this time to convince the French that this country isn't withered and rife with noxious vapors. The Republic's going to hell in a handbasket. All the poets say so. Though on second thought, a moose might not be a bad start. What with that high-speed train and all, let's take him live this time and forget about the French. Let's walk him right through the front doors of the House of Representatives. Knock, like we're showing up for the State of the Union. Antlers swinging, hooves skidding, marble 7 feet tall, behold. Of course, then, there'll be a debate between Alaska and Wyoming on the origins of this moose. And the South Dakotans will raise the question of bison. Point of order, the New Jersey delegation will propose an amendment to substitute a horse, an armadillo, a golden bear, a badger, or a ruffed grouse. The Arizona delegation will move to see his papers. Then some tired soul from the back bench, I yield my time to the gentleman from Virginia and the lady from Oregon. You behold the moose. Me, a deep curtsy, knee to the floor. Yes, behold, Nunc dimittis Domine. Crazy Jefferson, we're still arguing with him after all this time. This next poem is the first poem of a section that I'm going to read you 3 poems from, and the section is called Logger's Wife Marks the Year. And it's a series of dramatic monologues in the voice of this logger's wife. I grew up in Lane County and was graduating from high school just as the spotted owl was listed. And so that was, my friends would say to me, well, why do you need to go to college? You can make $20 an hour at the mill. And I'm telling you, it was a long time before I made $20 an hour, so it was a good point. But unfortunately for them, it didn't last very long. And this first poem is called Logger's Wife Writes the God Squad. And as maybe many of you remember the God Squad, I know Nancy Flynn knows the God Squad well. When there's a dispute about a endangered species listing, there's a statute that allows the coming together of all these agency heads and others to look at the listing. And the God Squad was called together for one of the very few times, really, over the spotted owl listing. And the Northwest representative, there's one Northwest representative, and it happened to be Governor Barbara Roberts was the representative. You'll hear a reference to her there. And it was just a scene when the God Squad was convened. Maybe some of you remember. I know Nancy does. So this is set up on the McKenzie River near to where I grew up. Logger's Wife Writes the God Squad. New Year's Day, 1992, 38 degrees, drizzle. Dear God Squad and Mr. Secretary and honorable men of oceans and forest and ministers of owls and also secretaries of plowshares and war, though it seems that the only one of the lot of you who knows anything about being a secretary is that lady governor, and for sure she's outnumbered. It's been a long winter out here on the river. We haven't seen sun since the leaves left, since our souls drifted into fur as smoke, clinging to the last butterscotch drops of summer. That's been 5 full moons, and this is a particular harsh, dark bend of river, kitty corner from Eagle Rock, and a 5-minute drift from Finn Rock, where Barry Lopez, God love him, paces the floor and ticks out paeans to the Republic. In truth, the trees are more gray than green, dripping snowmelt and beardy lichen, and though none of them even 3 feet thick, I could count the rings like raindrops, and mostly those trees would be younger than my granddad, and nearly half as mean. I'll guess about 28 inches at breast height and no more than 2 full logs tall. I never could convert to board feet, but they're rangy and choked, strangled by vine maple and English ivy. Oh, dear God Squad, I know you have your work cut out for you, and so do we. Working to raise babies from bark, though I haven't had the luck of real babies yet, and the bark scrapes off harder and harder now. There's some things you need to know about spruce and owls and the sharp curve in the river, but first let me ask, what is it like to be seated with the Almighty? I saw on TV last night the crowd part, and you, the gray suits, and that high-heeled governor so small and tinkly next to you, wearing her saucer pink glasses as a shield. Hound and I walk every day and count the trucks as they pass, as they whip ice water from the chicory ditch, bumpers sporting, I love spotted owls, fried. But the chicories long died back, and I knitted flowers all through the winter to recall the particular tilt of trillium and mariposa, sweet William, and lady slipper. The road is haunted silent now, this fogged-in first day of the year. But even on the hard-workingest Mondays, the trucks that used to be thick as summer ants, no. They leave the mountain now like pearls hitting the floor, each tire splintering the ice-spidered mud. My husband, Logger, he hangs on to his name, though he logs precious little these days. Mostly he sells spoilt milk and ties flies with his bacon slab hands at the grocery and tackle upriver. But he keeps his name. Excuse me. And I do too, spending my days baking pies at Mom's for a drunk and a half-wit. We still like the sound of Logger and wife, despite the reality, kind of like Jews for Jesus. Don't get me wrong, God Squad. Have you ever seen a clear cut? Now with those big cats, stumps fall jagged as a fish knife. Back when Logger and his daddy pulled the big cross saw, 80-footers dropped so smooth I could use the stump as a cake stand. I wonder what it's like in your country, where the radio calls for sun every day and the government and God obey. But it's not that bad here, really. It's too mossy and rich a kingdom for death or desolation to take hold. The elk slink down and fall and pick amongst the Virginia creeper, redder and thornier than the Lord intended. The snag across the river leans just right for the heron, and the bright wing of osprey flashes while I sing Land of the Empire Builders and boil cabbage for supper. Listen, our preacher in town, the one with the cauliflower ear tuned for the devil, he's got a scripture you should know about, Genesis 1:26. I know it's gritty work ruling over the fish, and the birds are a flighty lot. But I don't need to tell you. I've never seen one of those shy owls, and though I lie in bed holding my breath like a swimmer, I can't hear even the faintest call over the north rush of the river. Who am I to know? I heard that snakes in Guam bear spiders, and that in Alaska there are 1,000 names for snow. The foxes are all gone from these parts now, and the fiddleheads have not yet begun their curve. But we appreciate your upside-down affections, Mr. Secretaries. Jesus loves the meek, but God prefers the mighty. I'm not sure which team to back, but I can tell you this. Logger wears suspenders to bed and rubs his teeth like sandpaper on steel. The river is muddy and eats greedy at the shore. Into your hands, sirs, I am commended. Logger's wife. This one is this is a few months later in the year. Logger's wife wades for huckleberries. Autumn equinox, 61 degrees, sunny, broken by clouds. The huckleberries near the house, tinged tart and red, lace the tongue with promises of homework and leftovers and half-done chores. The river is late summer low, and suddenly we are on the Christmas side of the year. Not just halfway there, but halfway past halfway, and it's 50 paces to the island if you hold your breath. You pull on Logger's waders and cinch tight. They slit the shoulder. Hound barks and barks on the bank. The sun wobbles on the ridge, then sighs and slumps toward death. The river crashes your boots and knocks your breath back to March. The island shimmers blue and wild, mid-river and spilling over with ripe. When the pint seal breaks on this year's jam, it'll be a jolt of water ouzel, a whiff of deer on the wind. The Grange ladies will long for long summer nights, and stars, road dust will tickle the back of their throats. It'll slide over the teeth-slippery rocks and linger on the tongue, like leather and boat bottom, like limestone and asphalt and money. It'll turn loggers' feet to ice. He'll talk of blossoming clover and merganser. Hound will whimper and kick in her sleep. You'll turn your face toward the light. And this, I'll do two more. I'll read one more logger. This is the last of the Logger's Wife for tonight. Logger's Wife whispers warning to the deer's four-chambered heart. November 25th, Thanksgiving Eve, 48 degrees, steady drizzle. So let me now breathe forth his secrets. He hates to loathing the spidery pull of blackberry brambles and bulrushes, the ghost chill of rain jumping the heel of his boot. He fears the call of the barred owl, the soulless blonde poured from a bottle. But he nurses a tender love for a yearling spike. He smells of stale sap and brittle tape, sings hallelujah under his breath. Keep watch for a trail of half-bent nails. He prays to the God of the left behind. Oh, dear heart, russet heart, peeling velvet heart, sleek and ferny heart, candle-wicking dear heart, rise slow. Sniff the last wisp of warning off the wind. If I should not outlive the brackish dark, bury my tatted, knitted, whipped and stitched, nearly mended heart beneath a mossy log, moldering far from the sun. Even Logger walks half-hearted now, slinking slow from the porch, light split yoke. But he's parched for the gritty company of men, for the brace of first-raise whiskey, the rush of fire to the tongue. Thanks. So I thank you very much for your attention and forbearance. I'll read this last poem, and this poem is called Citizen Poet, and I actually now, as I put this reading together, realized how much it is a tribute to Haney and to from the Republic of Conscience. I think you'll hear some echoes of it. So it's called Citizen Poet. Let's see if there's anything that I need to explain. No, I don't think so. The only thing that's sort of interesting is the line ancient liberties and free customs actually comes from the Magna Carta. Citizen Poet. Then arose an unseasonable noxious wind, leaving me tongue-split and sniffing for lightning, blown sideways into the lamp black of a congress of crows. They, circling deep in widdershins, scolding and vowelless, coughing forth the tune to Semper Fi. Me, tattered but proud, in a crown of grape withers and chewing gum foil, clinging to my pocket copy of the Bill of Rights and mouthing certain glittery words. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. I was quick to learn. None of my kind can suss out the signs, though these things I know for sure. Right warning shocks like aluminum across the tongue. The price of tobacco remains ever stable. Lilacs and camellias trade for little, but soothe the mind of a lonely traveler. Alder whispers its name or warbles it for money. Here there are few visitors to the gallery of famous poets and botanists, but still I mistook this prayerless and tar-winged land for a nation-state, for an empire, for a kingdom, and I would have accepted any appointment, serf or subject, peasant or scold, but the paper-skinned oracle would have none of it. Here, even minor cabinet ministers stand for election. Election day breaks ravishing. The bald cypress shakes free its needles and spits its favorite word, libertine. The crows trade cigarettes and tear through the trees, scattering prayer candles and Sacagawea dollars. As for me, if elected, I will peel back the black earth and lay bare what is scratched there. Poet, liar, citizen of the unconscious. And yet, with all the ancient liberties and free customs, the ballots are burned with aplomb. The wind dies down and it's unanimous. I am expelled with a hacksaw, a faint salute, a nosegay of orange nasturtium and wilting honeysuckle. On the surface, the old streets wind bright and unmappable. I cannot measure the length of the hours or recall the name of each ashen face. Pliny the Elder turns out to be unreliable. Crows do not speak with split tongues, and wine is rife with lies. The shadow of bruised black feathers cast long in the mind of the returned. I cannot flirt comfort now, no, but I will carry this dark cinder for the nation. Thank you all very much for coming. Thanks to Tom. Eat snacks. Did you want... If anyone has any questions or comments or criticisms, I'm open to them.
Well, yes, we have a time for questions and answers. Something I always wonder is, who do you feel are influences on you as a poet?
Oh, that's a great question. Whitman, I mean, is for me if people have to put themselves in the Whitman or Dickinson camp, I'm definitely in the Whitman camp. Some of the other poets who Milosz, the Polish poet Milosz, is someone who is so dear to me and I go back to often. Contemporary poets, I'm a tremendous fan of C.D. Wright's poems and those long book-like poems. So those are some of the people who I really admire. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Violet's going back to make a rush on the cookies. So, thank you all very much for coming. Yes?
I'll ask the other one.
Yeah.
What's your writing practice?
Well, so as you can imagine, we have a lot of chaos in our life with 3 kids, 2 gigantic dogs, and 2 full-time jobs at least, and so I really write. I'm a catch-as-catch-can writer. I'm not an everyday writer. I'm not a person who's got a ritual. I kind of wish I were that person, but I really just write as I can, and it takes a long time for me to start a draft. So I'll make pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of notes before I ever start to write a poem. And I write one poem at a time, and it can take really months to get to a draft that I feel like is actually a poem. So it's not exactly the most productive of writing practices, but it's what I have available to me at the moment. And I really admire people who say, I get up and I sit there and I write every morning, and I'm just not in that position at this point. I'm making lunch.
Well, okay, if there aren't any more questions, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.